All
No,
good.
no, no. It's called casual, man. It's all from the heart,
Conversation.
man.
It's just a
Yeah, yo,
conversation.
Sean. So, hey, thanks for taking the time. So, yeah, like I mentioned, it's gonna be a very casual chat. And one thing why I really wanted to reach out to you was I guess a lot of people really should hear your story because I think you have a story that could benefit a lot of people in our community, right?
Right.
Especially people who want to self-learn or even switch careers. And I think that's one of the your unique stories. But if you don't mind sharing with the community, right, or sharing with people who are watching this video, I mean, what's your background and what's your story?
Sure, man. Thanks for the time. Yeah, just a little bit about me. I'm actually a chemical engineering grad. So, and entered the workforce about in 2019. I worked as a process engineer, basically a design oriented process engineer lah, but working for a consulting company. Basically, we are like subcontractors to like Petronas, Exxon, people like that, and we do all the engineering designs and stuff like that. So I was doing that for about a year. Yeah.
And I mean, what made you want to switch from an engineering field? And to me, process consultancy sounds exciting even. Why the switch? And what
Yeah,
was the key
definitely.
thing? Yeah.
I was actually liking what I was doing. It's just that, so the timing and everything was just had so much to play basically. So in 2020, in early 2020, March as we know it, basically Malaysia went into a lockdown, right? But even slightly before that, due to the nature of the consulting jobs, so it's project based. So our workload as the workforce is very heavily dependent on sort of the nature of the project and which phase of the project is it on, right? So if when there's heavy workload, everyone's really busy, but when there's low workload, everyone's free. So in about February, I think we had quite a low workload season for like a couple of weeks before the next phase of the project. And we had a little bit of downtime in the sense that we would be at work, but there wasn't much work to be done. And I was just like, I'm quite free at work now. So let's just take this opportunity, or at least this couple of weeks, and let's just learn up something new, lah. Like upskill, learn something new. I have time, right, on my hands, so why not do that? So that was the original plan, right? And I've always um, thought that learning programming would be cool. It sort of started during when I was working a lot with like Excel sheets and stuff, and I just sort of dwindled a little bit into VBA lah, like my Excel VBAs, right? But all I was doing before that was just like recording macros. So I would just like press record, and I would do the actions, and then I would actually go into the script and just like sort of try to manipulate it a little bit. But that's about it lah. So I always thought programming would be cool to automate stuff. So yeah, so I just told myself, okay, I'm going to learn a little bit of programming during this downtime, and that was the case. That was literally the case, and I was like, okay, I'm going to watch a few crash courses. I actually started off with Python because automation, right? You think like Python and anything like that. So that was kind of, I watched a couple, like watched like maybe 3 hours crash course on Python. I thought like, yo, that's it, man. And like I know the fundamentals now, I can get started on something, but that was obviously not the case. So that was kind of how it started for me in that sense. And during that time when I was trying to learn these things on the side, basically the lockdown happened.
Mm.
And the lockdown happened, and actually no, right? I mean, even before the lockdown happened, I sort of already kind of committed to sort of a long-term learning. After
Mm.
sort of dwindling my toes a little bit into this tech world, and
Mm.
finding like, oh, actually it's really interesting. I'm really loving what I'm learning. Let me just learn a little bit more, right?
Mm.
And then the lockdown actually happened, and that was when I didn't need it to commute to work anymore. So we were all
Mm.
working from home. I used to commute 2 hours a day, 1 hour
Wow.
to 1 hour to KL, 1 hour coming back, right? So it's just a good 2 hours every day, and I suddenly had 2 hours free in a day. So I was like, oh, okay, I have two additional 2 hours in a day. Why not put that time, since I was already learning something, right? Put that time
Mm.
to better use, and that's when I sort of continued learning even more. So that was kind of how it slowly just transitioned, and that's how it started for me, I think.
Okay, that's interesting. So, but in the end of the day, right? Why would you,
Mm.
from a very nice consulting job, why would you want to jump to programming? What's the interesting thing about programming that really got you and saying that okay, this can be my career?
Yeah, lots of factors. One being, okay, I was in consulting. It's a good environment and all. But at the same time, it was oil and gas. Yeah, so I didn't mention this. I was actually in oil and gas sector, and during this time, COVID, right? Oil and gas
Uh,
got hit really hard. right? I've
Yeah.
actually, I noticed some of my colleagues, and I actually experienced some of my colleagues being retrenched during this time. Fortunately for me, I got to secure my job because the project got extended, and I was part of that project team that basically got extended. So I was fortunate, but some of my colleagues were not. And I think, this was just one of the factors. I was like, oh, okay, this is quite a cyclical nature. This is quite a up and down sector, and it's quite, there are good times, there are bad times, and it's normal. Speaking to some of our seniors, this is a cyclical nature, and it's quite normal to sometimes lose your job because there's no projects, or the demand for oil or whatnot is quite low, so there aren't projects coming in. All right, so that's one factor. The other factor I think is the whole fact that tech just really interests me at that point. I was like, oh, you can. I started, so it was from Python, and then I soon realized, okay, I can't really do much like front end stuff with Python as fast as I would like to. And I think that's when I actually started discovering more about like JavaScript and that whole ecosystem. So then I started realizing, oh, I can build really cool stuff with just like all these front end frameworks, right? Front end languages and just scripting and whatnot. And I think that enticed me more, and that really attracted me a lot more as well. And the whole nature. So everyone's in lockdown, right? We're all remote working, and that whole nature of, so most industries were actually struggling to work from home or struggling to work remotely, but sort of the tech industry and a developer's role thrives sort of in isolation, in remote working. I mean, you still lose
Mhm.
out on that communication, but the whole nature of that tech role, right? You actually can thrive in natures like this, like remote working. You can operate like as per normal. So I think that really
Yeah.
interests me. I was like, oh, you can work remotely, for example, for a company in Singapore, and you are living in Malaysia. That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, quite a few factors, and those were just like one of the two factors.
Okay, yeah, I mean, valid points you raise, and yeah, those are good points. So, and for yourself, right? And from what I heard from your story, it took you just maybe around 6 months really to learn up. Correct me if I'm wrong. Around 6 months to learn up, coding before you landed your first full time job. Tell us what was the journey like? I mean, that must have been really amazing. A lot of people, I mean, for you to be able to do that in 6 months. I mean, how was it like? What was the struggles? What was your key success factor, you know?
Yeah, I think we were having a chat prior to this as well before, and I did mention 6 months, and so I was having a full time job, but I think ultimately it was just like I was really into it, and I had my eyes set on a goal. I was like, okay, I actually gave myself to the end of 2020, so that was 2019, right? And then 2020 was COVID, so I gave myself actually to the end of 2020 to actually transition into a new role, because at some point I started about in February. I think in about April or May, I told myself, yeah, I'm just gonna really try hard on this and try to transition into tech, coming where I'm from. So I gave myself that goal, and it was just a grind. It was just a grind daily. I would spend any time I had, like basically, right, before work, after work, weekends, just learning, right, learning, trying to build stuff, trying to come out with a portfolio. Because obviously, if you look at my CV, then I was like, I had nothing. I had no relevant skills. I had quite zero transferable skills besides like soft skills. All the hard skills were not transferable. They were very chemical engineering oriented. So I had to sort of build something for myself to showcase that, okay, at least I can do stuff, I can build stuff. I at least have something to show for. I have a conversation starter if I'm trying to apply for a job, right? I can show them, hey, this is what I've been trying to build or I've built, and maybe we can talk about that. So that was sort of the plan, and it's like you said, I think it took me in total about 6 months before I fully transitioned and got a role. But yeah, every day was just, I think ultimately it's because I had the interest and I had sort of the liking for it as well, right? And that just kept me going every day. Literally, I was like, okay, the COVID did help, but I was like spending my weekends. I was literally spending my Saturdays and Sundays like learning, building, and yeah, just equipping myself, I think.
Would you say, I mean, how many hours would you spend on a weekend really learning up
Dude,
coding?
I can't tell you, but like I would say 3 quarters of the day, maybe, right, on the weekends. If I wasn't going out lah, right, on the
Yeah.
days that I wasn't going out, I'll spend like 3 quarters of the day just like a lot of it was just consuming. I think just learning by consuming. So I was consuming
Yeah.
a lot of information.
Yeah.
Less of the time was actually building because I was still quite new, right? So I had to consume a lot before I could actually sort of tangibly try to build
Mm.
stuff. So yeah, lots of time.
Interesting. So if you had to say, what are the two secret techniques that you use, or what would you say was your key ingredient for success in that 6 months that you say everyone must have if they want to be able to self-learn? What would you say is one or two things that's critical?
You know, I'll probably say from my perspective because I think everybody in their own season, and it really depends where you're coming from. If you're coming from like again, you have a degree, you're coming from another job, it's probably quite different if you're like let's say at uni right now and you're studying
Mm,
something different and you're trying to learn
mm,
because the time frame and your availability will look very different in those two circumstances. But I'll try to speak from my own perspective. I think so. Again, I think I had that goal in mind. So I told myself end of 2020. And I think besides that, so mind you, actually, I was doing this all by myself. I tried to find a community at the time, which was actually how I tried to reach out to Hacker Collective.
mm,
Because I think I just felt a little bit like, oh, I'm just doing this alone. Like, I was really excited, right? But I really wanted to speak to people about it. But all my friends around me were like either accounting grads or like typical mechanical engineers
okay.
or people from that background. So I had like very to little to none context of friends that I could like sort of
Mm.
share this interest and share this passion with lah. So so I was pretty much doing that alone. But again, so I think for me it was having that goal, and then every this didn't last obviously the whole 6 months, but I think at least for the first few months, I sort of set a to dos for the day. I would sort of like the night
Mm.
before, right? I would because I was most of the time going through like Udemy courses or online courses or whether it's YouTube courses, right? Um, and there were certain aspects of the course that you could see lah, from the like table of contents. And I told myself, okay, I want to do, let's say, these few topics by today or like by the next day. And I would sort of prepare myself the night before, and I'll just try to list down whether or not I actually complete that. That's regardless of the case. But I think just at least doing that daily sort of helped me and helped me sort of stay on track and to be really disciplined. So that's I think number one. Um, and I think the second one, I was just you gotta like what you're learning,
Yeah.
right? To be honest, so
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
I was really liking what I was learning because at the same time I did see what you could potentially build, sort of at the end of it, or at least up to a certain point where you've been equipped, you can build all this cool stuff, and that really motivated me. I think it's like, oh man, like I always see all these like really cool, um, whether it's like super complex tutorials or like online projects that people build, and I'm like, man, I can eventually build that next, and that's like really cool. So I think that's probably one of the other reasons.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. So, after your entire journey, when you learned for about 6 months plus, and you went for the interview, right? Can you tell? I mean, tell us. What was the company really looking for? Because you weren't a graduate from your university in computer science as well. And then what was the company's mindset and perspective towards self-taught learners like yourself? What did they ask? Did they check your CV? What was it like?
Yeah, good question. Again, I think it was you make it sound like I got my job really easy, but I actually so I applied for probably over 20 roles, I think,
Mm,
in total until it was a consecutive thing, but I think in total probably more than 20. And again, not many got back to me, right?
oh,
Because maybe the requirements were like they weren't looking for a junior, or maybe I'm not from that background. So
mm,
most just didn't come back to me, or some they would have an upfront assignment before you have to submit like that assignment along with your CV. So I would try to do that assignment and submit my CV and hoping that they'll get back to me, but
mm,
I just don't get some of the replies, right?
mm,
So I can't really tell what they're looking for in for some companies. And some of the companies, they're either startups and their budget might be lower because I was coming from a position that I have a job. I at least want to match the pay,
mm,
or at least at the most take maybe like a 10% cut, I think, from my perspective. So I think some of the startups, they would they would be okay with hiring with people regardless of the backgrounds. But I think some of the recruiters did say that uh, this company is quite tight on the budget, so they would say max will pay is like X amount, right?
Mm,
And I think they were asking, so what's your current salary or your expected salary? And I'll tell them my current salary, and they'll say, oh, that's going to be quite hard for the company to match, right?
mm,
So there might be different reasons, but I think for I can say for some SMEs and most startups, they actually don't really care whether or not you come from a conventional like IT or computer science background, because at
mm,
the end of the day, they are going to be assessing you, whether or not that's in-person online tech assessment, technical
mm,
technical assessment, or whether that's through your portfolio, a one-to-one whiteboarding or whatnot. So I think
mm,
for those companies, because they have to be very very selective on who they hire, they have a very tight budget. They don't, as long as you can show that you can contribute back to them, they're
mm,
not really too concerned. But I think it's getting that first step, because a lot of times for bigger companies like MNCs, they get my girlfriend used to work for a recruiter for one of the big four companies. So these companies get like hundreds and hundreds of applicants a day. And if they would see
mm,
like, okay, this person doesn't fully have uh, transferable, not transferable, but relevant experience or relevant skills, right? Maybe they see, okay, this person's done a course online, but maybe the degree is not as suitable, and you don't have any portfolio to showcase. They're just gonna put it aside because they have like another 100 CVs to look through in that day, right? So I think you're so for me, I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to apply for the big companies anyways. But I didn't really hear back from big companies. And I don't, I mean, I can't blame them again, right? They get like tons and tons of
yeah, yeah,
applications per day. And it's the smaller companies that were the one that actually heard back, because I think they have a smaller applicant pool. They have the time to go through it and actually call you up and actually have
yeah,
a conversation and learn more about you, I think. So yeah, that
yeah.
was from my experience, I think. Again, I did a few online assessments and tech assessments. Some didn't go too well. Some were okay. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So that's interesting to hear. There's very good perspectives on that. Now, you think a lot about the future of coding, right? And if you think a lot about the future of your career, and I mean, generally anyone would think about that. What would you say is your future plans in terms of in the software world for the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, is there really, if all coders were to plan out their careers, right? Is there like what you call so-called a best plan, or what is the plan that you think suits you or suits any coder out there for their careers?
I can't speak for all, but I think speak for at least my what I'm
Gives
planning
them a
maybe.
maximum salary, right? Gives anyone the maximum salary, right? Maximum career growth, right? Yeah. I'm assuming that's the direction you're heading to.
I think it really depends. Maximum
Yeah.
salary doesn't always correlate with maximum growth. And a
Okay.
lot of times, that's very true. Because, for example, if you want maximum growth, and I think people hear this a lot, go for startups, right? You're forced to do everything. And startups don't generally pay the most
Mm,
upfront at the start, anyways, right? As they're
mm,
growing. And if it's an early stage company, they don't have the budget. But the learning is going to be crazy because you're just forced to do everything. And when you go into bigger companies, the prioritization is different. So I speak from someone who's in a medium-sized company, still pretty agile, but at the same time, there is dedicated tech departments that handles dedicated stuff like dedicated DevOps, dedicated backend, dedicated front ends. And your focus is very different. Your focus a lot is optimization, um, very high quality code, and always cost savings, cost optimization, right? And it's because there's dedicated companies and dedicated people to do that focus can be there. When you're in a smaller company, it's always just to ship new features, to ship new products ASAP, because you aren't that concerned of quality, you aren't that concerned
mm,
of, okay, cost maybe, but maybe you might not be too concerned because maybe your bandwidth is much lower, your user pool is much lower, right? So you can afford to be a little bit less stringent on that. But the
yeah.
focus is really different, and I think that's what I've noticed. Because one of the actually, I had two offers at the time when I was considering transitioning to tech, right? And one of it was a digital agency company which does external projects, and versus my current company that is internal products. So the focus would have been really, really different. external projects, you'll just be about shipping at the end of the day, right? Tight deadlines, ship.
Yes.
When it's an internal product, it's always about the quality. It's always about the security, the cost, and all that. So I think it gives a very different learning experience. But for me, I think being exposed to an internal product, I've come to really appreciate like code quality, product quality, cost
Mm.
optimization, performance. Yeah, performance is a huge thing in my
Yeah,
department.
yeah.
Performance and just all this. So it's basically the nitty gritty in terms of the tech stuff. It's
Mm,
not as concerned of like we need to ship this ASAP. Granted, we do, but not as tight as external deadlines.
mm,
So I think I've really come to appreciate the quality of it, right? And I think if you were to ask me again, maybe what's the plan in the like maybe in the next few years? Again, I think architecture and product architecture in terms of the tech side quite interests me quite a bit because again, you really think about how can I scale this up, right? I think architecture is always about scalability. It's always about
mm,
costs. You want to lower the cost, but you don't want to sacrifice scalability. And I think
mm.
thoughts like that, very high level thoughts of the technical side, not so much like of the product side. Um, yeah, at the moment now interests me quite a bit. I think.
So you see yourself becoming, you want to be a software architect, I'm guessing.
I wouldn't say architect, but someone at least in a position that can say, I want to use these tools, I want to use these products, or I think we should in any case because XYZ, right?
Mm,
And to actually start that conversation. And I think my position actually right now and this my department has the flexibility to do that, and it's actually given us some opportunities to sort of explore what we can use and what we can explore because we're not too tied down. Again, we're like medium sized, right? So we're
yeah.
not too tied down that like, oh, we've been using this legacy tech for like 10 years. We can't switch out.
Mm, mm,
Um, as long as we can prove why we want to use certain things to the management,
mm.
more likely than not, we can get a green light. Lah. So I think it's given us that flexibility to explore different tools, different technologies.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I, I wanted to get your thoughts on this since you work in a foreign company, I believe, right? It's foreign owned, right? Um,
Um,
sort of. Okay, maybe not
sort of,
local.
but
Okay,
sort of. Okay.
okay. But my, that's right. So and my thoughts was this about Malaysia, right? And here's my crazy assumption: Malaysia's tech scene is unfortunately very behind. That's my assumption, right? And the reason why I say that is because in Malaysia, as compared to Singapore or maybe Europe, uh, we tend to be more of a service-oriented industry where we have a lot of agencies doing software work for a few big companies, right? And because they are very agency-minded, they tend to just say, oh, you know what? Hey, PHP is amazing. I know PHP for the past 20, 30 years in the career. Let's just stick to PHP because we can ship that out fast, right? And now we still do PHP all the while. While in other countries, if you're doing internal product, you'd be like, man, PHP is a bit old, right? Why not JavaScript? Why not another language, right? So, firstly, what are your thoughts about this in terms of our Malaysian landscape? Do you think we are quite slow behind, or are we cutting edge? And if we are slow, could that be one of the reasons, or what do you think the reasons are in terms of Malaysian landscape, based on companies you heard or friends and all that?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. And I think it is quite prominent in the sense that a lot of the, for example, conferences, a lot of just tech personas and people you learn from online and figures you learn from or resources you learn from, right? They don't come from most of the time. They don't come from Asia, right? They come from
Mm,
Europe. They come from US or wherever else. Um, so I to a certain extent I do agree that the landscape is not as great, but actually, granted, there is actually a quite a strong talent pool. It's just that the landscape is not that great. There's
mm,
actually promising talent locally, but maybe just the conditions and the and like you said, service oriented landscape may have positioned the Malaysian tech background to be as such lah. So yeah, I think following that, like what was the second part to the question?
no, why? I mean, in regards to the landscape in general, are we slow to adopt new technologies, and why are good developers always moving out to other countries, right?
Mm, mm, mm.
um that's like, is it due to our landscape, or are we not the case, or are we the case where actually Malaysian companies are always very cutting edge and doing a lot of stuff? Because my logic is that we're always back in PHP, for example, and that's just one example of where we don't change, right? Is that
Mm.
the case based on your experiences? I mean, working in because your company does internal products, or asking
Yeah, I
friends.
can again. I can only speak from my perspective, and
Okay.
it isn't very broad. But there, I speculate that possibly again the focus of shipping may have just been that, okay, let's just ship this in the fastest way possible. How can we do that, right? And
Mm,
all the quality and the nitty gritty of like learning the cutting edge stuff, learning the most performance stuff, learning the new tools and the new technologies that could potentially change the landscape is an
mm,
afterthought.
mm,
And that's could be why, right? People just put the focus of, I need this. How can we do it? Let's do it with the current things that we know how, or if not, let's outsource it, and we don't really care how they do it as long as it works. Um, then yeah, so that could potentially be
mm,
the case. And again, it we don't have like, there's not much community, there's not much avenue and platforms like conferences in Malaysia to inspire these things, right? Imagine if there was a JavaScript Malaysia, and it would really like, it focuses on sort of having speakers, having panel speakers to talk about the JavaScript landscape and the advancements of tech globally, but also
mm,
locally, right?
mm,
Whereas Malaysia, what's Malaysia looking like in the tech scene, in the tech
mm,
platform in the next 5 years? And then if people start, having places to talk about things like that, then potentially maybe the landscape might be slightly different.
Interesting. Okay, good point. Although I must say, maybe because you joined the scene a bit late, but 2 years ago before COVID, there was things like JavaScript Malaysia and Python Malaysia. They still are, but these communities are very small. You often see the same faces over the 1, 2, 3 years. The issues they don't tend to grow. But that's something we can always chat for another time. Okay, final two questions from me. I'm gonna and then give you a chance to share on one thing from you if you have anything to share. But what one would my second last question would really be on how do you see the role of community if you see, is there a gap in Malaysia for community, and what could community do? Okay, not just for coders, but for people who are in other fields, maybe accountants, lawyers, but also want to be inspired by coding, right? Do you see how communities could play a role, or if so, what could they do? You know?
Good question
Yeah.
again. I think so. So how I see this is because again, I mentioned I consume a lot of content, right? A lot of information, and this includes like podcasts. This includes like interviews by by more renowned tech people. Like for example, people who work heavily in the React community, people who contribute openly into the open source community, like React, like all the open source libraries. And these are people that are again well known, but they are connected by that open source community. They're connected by whatever they have in common in terms of, let's say, oh, front end. There's a huge front end community in the States. And most of the time it's not just because they're in like San Francisco or whatnot. They could be connecting with people from like Canada, right? And it's because I think again there's that digital community that they just have something in common that they can talk about, and you can like really sort of geek out about, like if you like
Mm,
you're really interested in, for example, performance, right? I'm sure there's bound to be other people who are interested and like obsessed with like performance optimization and things like that. And I think at the end of the day, it's just being able to bounce ideas off each other, being able to share ideas amongst each other. And I see that a lot in this Western space, right? Again, I mentioned podcasts, I mentioned like interviews or like online conversations that different figures would have, and this happens a lot even on Twitter. And I think Twitter is a dying platform to many, but I think for some reason all the tech people are there, and they always share all their latest thoughts, especially all the new technologies there. I stopped using Twitter for like a good 4 or 5 years, I think, or like at least close, maybe at least 3 4 years. But I recently downloaded it again just so that I could see what's the landscape on this the tech landscape on Twitter, because it's really interesting, and I think it is like zero barriers. So people just like, oh, I learned something new today, and they just start sharing it there. And
Mm,
again, you asked what's the importance of community, and I think this is the importance because you're learning from others. You're learning from either the mistakes that others have made, or you're able to just bounce off ideas. Like you don't know how to solve something, you just ask the online community, right? You just say, I'm facing this issue, and you just bounce off your ideas of people who are more experienced in that domain, and they'll probably give you suggestions. And I think that's sort of the key of it, because who else are you going to ask, right? If there isn't a physical person here you can ask, there should always be an online community that you can ask, I think. And I think this is one of the fields that is very reactive. It's the response rate is very high because again, it's digital, right? You don't have to like put it in a Lawyat forum,
yeah.
and then wait for like for a bit before it gets responded. Again, some people just they just throw it on Twitter. And
Mm,
if you're a public figure, you have a high following, people respond, right? Because people are interested again. So I think, yeah, that's from my observation, I think.
okay, okay. Great stuff on that. Now, is there anything that you are doing now, or is there something that you want to pitch to people that to get them on board any projects you're working on, anything that someone's watching this video saying, hey, I want to partner with Sean or do something exciting? What's an opportunity you can tell people right now that say, hey, software has tons of interesting stuff, I'm doing this stuff, this is an opportunity you should look out for? Is there anything that people can work with you to engage on, or any projects you're working in, or stuff they should look out for that they can get excited about right now?
Mm. So I think not just me. So hopefully not everybody starts bombarding me with messages. But I think look out for tech communities in Malaysia. I think in the last 2 years, it's been growing quite a lot. And if you're thinking of starting on this journey, it's always nice to have a community, to have people that can encourage you, people that could advise you on certain things, and and just look out for you, right? And hopefully partner together in creating something. Because you could already be experienced, right? And maybe you just want somebody to work on something with you, or you're trying to find people to work on different ideas with you, or maybe you have a freelance gig and maybe you need help. It's always good to have a community of people so that you can just ask for help, and look out for people. And there's a few communities in Malaysia. One of them, and Ming's currently heading them, is the Hacker Collective Malaysia, right? Great community, really growing. Not just Malaysia, actually, in Southeast Asia. So you get different ones from all around Southeast Asia as well. So that's one community. The other would be developers Kaki as well. So up and coming community as well. So yeah, there's again, I think the landscape is slow, but it's slowly growing. There's more and more engagement, and there's more and more people entering this tech space. Again, if you're not in it, you're probably isolated from it, because before I started looking out for people, before I started entering this domain, I thought there's nobody. Again, right, I mentioned all people are all around me. No one does tech. I was like, man, why are they so hard to find tech people? But then once you're in a community, because I think it's still quite a small and tight knit community, people are quite close, and you would see recurring faces, definitely. Some bigger names in Malaysia. So, but yeah, definitely do get involved if you're keen.
Amazing, awesome, and yeah, thanks for that pitch for Hacker Collective
Hey,
community.
anytime. I
Um,
forgot to mention I'm part of
yeah,
Hacker
yeah.
Collective too.
No, it's good. Yeah. So, final word to you. Do you have anything you want to share with people about, just any message about anything that they should know, or they is useful for them? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, never stop learning, right? Even for people like Ming, who's been doing this for quite a few years now, he's always learning every day as well. And I think everyone in the tech scene, because of how fast the tech advances in general, we always have to be on our toes, and we always have to be on our feet to basically learn the new thing, learn what's modern, learn what's new, so that we can just be up to date, right? And I think always just be humble, even as you're learning, because you can never learn everything, and you can never master all the domains, I think. So yeah, just always learn. There's always people who are better than you, so always don't be afraid to just reach out and learn from others, and learn from each other, I think. Yeah, let's see. Final advice: stay safe. Stay safe.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. Thanks, Sean. Now that's amazing stuff, man. Yeah, and I cannot agree completely, right? I mean, like, cannot agree more. You always got to be always learning. Like, people have stopped learning, especially in tech field. That's the day when it's over, right? Because you gotta
Mm.
always never stop learning. But cool. Thanks for that. I'm gonna pause the recording now and
All
say
right.
bye bye.
See ya.